everyone is different. Actually, the cornerstone of the business is personalizing healthcare. So if we're going to do it there, we have to do it with our team as well. It doesn't make any sense. And I think understanding people's needs, and do they have families, or are they young and just kind of started working and they want to do as many hours as possible? So you need to be aware of them having burnout or working too many hours in the week because they've got a full-time job. So I think there's a number of different things that we are out there now, in ways of employee assistance programs and well-being events, and companies like yours as well, definitely, that
Mm.
which I think is amazing because it focuses on the hardships that nurses go through as a profession.
Hemmen, thanks so much for joining me on Nurse Wellbeing Mission podcast. It's great to talk to you again. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm all right, thanks. Busy as ever. New Year kind of always kicks off something, and Christmas is always the busiest time for business. So, but I'm not too bad. Sun's shining, as you can see, so it's nice.
Yes, as we were just saying, you were nice and sun drenched in that
Mm,
February sun.
yeah, enjoy it while you have it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really looking forward to this conversation. I think you've got a really interesting background and sort of where you've come to now with your career. But for listeners, why don't you just fill us in on your journey, where you've come from, why you went into nursing to begin with, and some of the roles that you worked in, and what led you to where you are now?
So, starting off, why did I get into nursing? I'm not really sure. It's quite a weird one. Like, I wasn't overly that typical, stereotypical story of like I was so caring and then it led me into the profession. It was just my calling on what to do. I think it more found me rather than, I found it, which was an amazing experience. Actually, I did a 4 year master's, and that almost set the tone of what nursing would be, because you kind of have to do all the credits needed for a master's degree, but also then 2,500 hours of clinical practice embedded within that 4 years. So it was incredibly arduous, definitely. And again, that set the tone of work ethic of how kind of nursing I thought would be, which is quite cool. But along that period, learning how to care, and I think foundationally learning about it from foundations of care. I mean, the first year of nursing is about that, and it's little things of helping people with personal care and helping people who can't do certain things, and that was incredibly humbling, obviously. I studied in Nottingham and I visited a number of places which I'd never experienced before, and all different walks of life and different homes, and that gave me like an amazing experience about the broadness and the kind of scope of what nursing can span, and that kind of just drove me into wanting to do better. I mean, I didn't really do amazing at school. Like, I didn't work really hard. I was one of those kids that kind of messed around, but I think probably found myself at university a bit, as they say, and then kind of left and then went into work, big bad working world. Right? So I had tried a few places, and I did some like agency shifts and NHS and private, and then settled a job actually in the private sector quite early on in my career, which is not the typical route, I think, but I think what it did allow me to do, which I saw at the time, but also looking back now, is individualize my learning. So I really then could learn and understand what I didn't know and then go to kind of fill those gaps, but understanding healthcare as a holistic thing rather than just a task of nursing. And I think that's definitely what being at university did as well. And definitely doing a master's degree, kind of get that critical thinking of to analyze processes and systems and see, okay, well, how can that be better? So I was never one for the, oh, it's always been done that way, or okay, that's going to take too long to change the process. It was like, well, is it? Is it really? So I definitely went in with that mindset. I made it to charge nurse within kind of 3 years, 3.5 years, which was great. It was definitely an honor to be in a navy blue, which was definitely a kind of, I don't know, a kind of visionary moment that you kind of want to get to, a kind of one of those pinch me moments, especially university, because you have different grades of blue depending on what grade you are. So getting to that was amazing. And then I stayed there for a couple of years and worked through a different units, from day surgery to medical surgical, and then an outpatient center as well. So definitely got an experience for it. And then I left, and then I started my own company. So we can maybe talk about now, or we can talk a bit about that in a bit. But that kind of my journey. So I've been nursing now for 2013, so 10 years. So I've done
Amazing.
quite a bit, but not also done a lot yet because I understand my career is so long to go.
Well, it's incredible that you've broken away and started your own thing. And yeah, let's come back to that in a little while. We'll definitely delve into it. Something I'm curious to know about is you mentioned about you're someone who likes to improve systems and processes. And that's something that's been the same with me in different settings that I've worked in within healthcare. And I guess I'm interested to know what your experience was in some of those previous roles you had of perhaps how ineffective or maybe burdensome systems and processes impacted well-being of you or your colleagues. Like, were there things that created unnecessary stress, and was that something that you were looking to improve upon, or was it more focused on patient outcomes, for example?
I think it's a cycle, right? Healthcare, in essence, is a person-delivered service. So it's you focus just on the patient. It's like we want the best outcomes for the patient. What do you look back to? It has to be the people caring for them, right? So
Mhm.
you kind of start seeing that and say, okay, we take care of them, they'll take care of them. I think that's a really important thing, which I think is overseen obviously by politicians, and the way the healthcare system is probably structured doesn't kind of account for that. And getting the different experiences of different people, you're bringing a melting pot of people who are working in a very pressurized environment to achieve quite high outcomes, which are probably the highest outcomes because it's like, well, with people's lives. Like it's not, it's when people say it in a saying, it's like, well, it's not people's lives, is it? We're not making, well, it is. And so I think that's such an important understanding, which can be overlooked so much. And I think people understanding that people have their own lives within that. So seeing patients as people, but seeing nurses as people as well, and who have their own kind of problems going on, and trying to manage that, I think, on a daily basis is quite difficult in some ways, but it's also incredibly rewarding. I think as a team, when you come together, was probably one of the first things that I saw in nursing, and that's such a kind of beautiful thing.
And when you were a charge nurse in your previous role, you made it to that position. You were obviously responsible for a number of other junior staff, I imagine. What did you do as a leader in that organization to take care of your staff and thinking about their well-being? Was it specific conversations you had, ways you would support them? What was your sort of general approach?
I think quite a young charge nurse, I
Mm.
couldn't really fall back on experience as much. I think where my confidence was probably in my competence as a nurse, and where I worked, we kind of had a turnover of staff or agency staff. So it kind of really helped me along that my clinical competence was there for them. So at that stage of my career, I was there to be able to teach clinical staff tasks and teach junior staff on recognizing deteriorating patients and all that. Because especially in private healthcare, it's very different because on NHS, you have a junior doctor kind of on the ward all the time, and you have this kind of level of hierarchy where it's private healthcare, it's consultant delivered care, and you have one doctor for the whole hospital who's covering, but actually it's just nurses. So your role kind of spans into junior doctor level, F1, F2 level in terms of, okay, the consultant can't come until 6 o'clock and the patient's on well at 1. We should probably do blood tests so they're back for 6 o'clock rather than wait, and then it kind of carries on. So making those clinical decisions was probably my early days, the way that I supported staff the most, and knowing what I didn't know, always knowing that there's someone above me that I could ask or point someone in the right direction and saying, okay, actually I learned that, or you need to speak to this person about this, and putting your hands up and saying I don't know. I think is, and like knowing your limits in some way.
So important, isn't it? Yeah, to put our hands up sometimes. And I think it's incredibly powerful for people who are working with us when the leader actually says, I don't actually have all the answers, but perhaps you can direct people to where to get them from or problem solve something together. We're talking about your previous work as a charge nurse and some of the things that you would do as a leader, thinking about well-being. Now you've moved into this really exciting new position as an entrepreneur and leading a team of people in a kind of slightly different capacity. So let's just sort of tell us a bit more about what you're doing now.
So now, after leaving kind of private healthcare, after seeing that I thought patients deserve better, there's so many gaps in people's healthcare who they just don't know their way to navigate the actual kind of system and blowing between NHS and private and getting lost somewhere in between. So when I left, I started a CQC registered private district nursing and health concierge service. And that we provide community services privately to patients, going from blood tests to IV antibiotics, long-term wound dressings, and then also end-of-life care. So what we've done, or what I've done, is almost blended traditional models of care and delivery from around the world, actually, and see what kind of works, and built an agile and dynamic integrated care team, which is nurse-led, which then can care for patients, but also then fill the gaps in healthcare if it's NHS or private, to enhance the experience as an overall thing, and seeing healthcare as an experience rather than just a task-based service. So that's what I'm doing now. So I've run a team of 5, which is great, patients all over London, and growing, which is fantastic, providing so many different ranges, and seeing what people need out there, from hospitals to GP referrals, or just word of mouth, especially during COVID. It was validated that people needed blood tests at home, the ones that were shielding or just didn't want to go out. Care needed to continue, and we were definitely placed to do that, which is great.
It really sounds like you're filling an important gap in healthcare, and it's really impressive what you've already established. Something that I'm curious to know about is you've taken, I suppose, quite a different route to traditional nursing, or the traditional nursing career, by breaking away and doing your own thing. And of course, there are many sort of nurse entrepreneurs out there doing things differently to try and break through and drive innovation. I'm really curious to know your thoughts about, well, what was different about you? What made you take that leap, do you think? And do you think other nurses are perhaps not given opportunities to think outside the box, or it's just kind of not really a standard thing to do for nurses to innovate in that way?
I think entrepreneurship is not just about business, it's probably a mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and one that can be trained, but if you're more immersed in it, you just see it in some way. And that, yeah, it may relate to business, and you might walk down the street and see something and be like, oh, that would be like, it could work like this. And it's about a process and matching things together and how it would all come together. And nurses do that incredibly well for patients on a very micro scale. So I think it's understanding that there's transferable skills there, and there's so many different kind of career paths that you could go into. I think that could expand it. I mean, my first entry into it was at university. I had loads of friends who were doing business courses, who I lived with and all that, and I didn't really live with nurses. But I did one module at university on nursing and entrepreneurship, which was done by Stacey Johnson, bigger up, which was amazing. And she was my personal tutor, and that probably gave me the bug that it can be done slightly differently. And if you've got an idea, especially if you're a nurse, you've got 2 ways to kind of run with it. You go to your hierarchy of hospital and they try and work through the process and try and get that done, or you build a business and build a product out of it, potentially. And that's products, that's things that nurses could use or something like that, which is different. So services is a bit different. But I think at that point, I started seeing nursing and healthcare in a different way. I saw it for what it is, that it does cost money, and the way that you can cost cut and processes and match to people, and the way that people provide care and they're educated, then it's going to pass over to patients, and then the bottom line of healthcare kind of on the invoice. So I think I was very lucky to have that course, and I don't think how much it's taught through nursing. I don't actually know if it's a module at all in other nursing courses, and I think starts from there. Definitely. I think it's places where people can come to kind of get ideas and help ideas, right? Because that's one of the difficulty and challenges on my path, is there wasn't a lot of nurse entrepreneurs that I could look to that had that understanding of business and nursing, and trying to bring that together. in a way. So I think more role models. We'd love to try and be at some point, and help nurses kind of along that journey. But I think it's through education, whether that be at university or that be a CPD accredited module where nurses can come to and learn about it, and then see if that changes the way that they think, seeing the way they perceive healthcare, and let it grow from there. I think just planting a seed, people will come out with great things.
It's fascinating. I didn't realize that you actually had a module on it, and that's where some of this actually started. That's
Yeah,
such an amazing provision, isn't it, from the university to have that? Like
yeah,
you said,
definitely.
it's a formal space in which to reflect on things, to learn a bit more about someone else's journey, and stimulate some creativity.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely outside of the box of what healthcare sometimes can be. And I think seeing it from a different perspective sometimes, I think it definitely helps.
For sure. As your business grows and you work towards your vision, which you've shared with me before, which is really inspiring, what will you do as a leader to ensure your team, the people that work with you or for you, what will you do to ensure that they're getting the most out of work and their well-being is enhanced or sort of optimized?
Listen to them. I think that everyone is different. Actually, the cornerstone of the business is personalizing healthcare. So if we're going to do it there, we have to do it with our team as well. It doesn't make any sense. And I think understanding people's needs, and do they have families, or are they young and just kind of started working and they want to do as many hours as possible? So you need to be aware of them having burnout or working too many hours in the week because they've got a full-time job. So I think there's a number of different things that we are out there now, in ways of employee assistance programs and well-being events, and companies like yours as well, definitely, that
Mm.
which I think is amazing because it focuses on the hardships that nurses go through as a profession. I mean, nurses are the largest employee profession of pretty much any healthcare system in the world. So it's right that they have a focus on their well-being. Again, it's that cycle that I spoke of, right? You care for the carers, they'll care for you. I think understanding that a lot more. I think it's easy to say when my team's small. As if we go to a team of 100 nurses, I think it'll be a little bit more difficult, but I hope that the foundations won't change of personalizing it for them. What do you need? You tell us what you need and we can accommodate where we can. And I think nurses are so good at that, but not abusing it in any way, which I think has been done before. Abuse nurses' goodwill. I think definitely not doing that. Oh, do you mind? Or making them feel guilty. Oh, this patient really needs you. It's probably not the way to do things.
Yeah, it's quite manipulative in a way, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
making people feel guilty.
yeah.
Have you
And
had?
which happens on the wards as well, I can imagine. So it's like, oh, no, we're going to be like two nurses down, like, you've got to be here. And it's like, we'll just work 3 days. Like that kind of balance and understanding. It is that understanding, right? Back and forth between employee and employee. It's person to person. It's all what it comes down to.
I love that individualized approach, and it's so important because I think within organizations, obviously there's been post COVID, there's been a lot more focus on well-being in response. I say in response, but it's more reacting to what's happened with COVID, right? And the sort of increase in stress and mental health difficulties with nurses and other healthcare staff. And I think one of the criticisms people often have, I sort of hear nurses saying this, is that the organization's approach to well-being is not very individualized. And of course, like in a huge NHS trust or big place, it's difficult to speak to every single nurse individually, but you can do it in a smaller group and within a team or something to actually get feedback on what people need, rather than just saying, hey, we've got all this stuff, go and find the things that you need. It's not really addressing people's needs then, is it?
No, it's just kind of putting stuff out there and saying, go find your own way.
Yeah.
And I think this is where podcasts are so important. I think that's where they have such a positive effect on when the reach that they have is that when you hear and be like, oh, I'm not alone. And I think that's such a powerful thing that even if there were more groups set up for well-being and stress, stuff like that within hospitals, there could be a safe place for people to come and say, okay, I feel stressed. Okay, what's going on? And then you have a nurse that you've never met before who works on Ward 50 and you're on Ward 5. And it's like, oh yeah, I go through a very similar thing. This is what I did to manage it. So then you start kind of sharing experiences and ideas around. I think that could be a very powerful thing. I think underpinned by technology in some way, probably would be able to connect people together, but definitely more safe places. I think it's to come. I mean, you always got to look for the root cause, right? And if it's a system that's broken, it's trying to you're trying to just plug holes wherever you can, which is very difficult.
Definitely. I've got a question for you just about your perception of nursing and sort of reflecting on your experience of it and where you would ideally like to see things go. So you obviously have your own vision of what you're doing with Livaware, but based on your experience so far in the profession and your career, what would you like to see change within nursing? Perhaps whether it's some more of these changes at the educational level or just general changes that are made within the profession, within hospitals, within organizations, within the structure of nursing.
I think there's a respect there, but there's also a slight emptiness to the respect that the profession gets.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's clap on a doorstep and that's great. But actually, when they're telling you that they need more resource and they need more people, you turn a blind eye. And it doesn't really make sense in my eyes. And I think it's putting them more in the conversation, which I think, unfortunately, which is kind of pushed to the strikes are doing, and bringing it to the forefront of the conversation of how much they hold healthcare and the glue that kind of binds everything together. So I'd like to definitely see them maintain and be at the top table of more innovation, definitely. I've heard of cases of health tech companies where they want to change workforce management and they don't even have a nurse on their board of executives. And you're like, where's the site to that? It doesn't really kind of make sense. I think seeing the importance of nursing, I think, is a real important thing to do. It's where it's going to be seen in terms of making the decisions, but also breaking out and doing it on their own. Like I didn't set up Livaware to necessarily start a business. Like it wasn't like, oh, I want to start a business and all the fun things that come along with it. It was more, I want to nurse in the way that I want to nurse. I want to be able to spend time in a way that we spend time with patients and provide services to patients at home in a different way that's been done before. So I think it kind of comes back to the question about entrepreneurship, that if you have a lot more nurses that are taking responsibility for their own practice, then I think that helps people individualize their healthcare, but also then individualize the profession, because you're like, well, I've been a vascular nurse for X amount of time and I can put a cannula into a stone and still get blood out of it. So I was like, okay, cool. So why can't we do something with that? Why is there not a profession that you can go into? Or your hands are so steady, you could think about aesthetics or something like that for nurses, and a understanding of what people want, and where healthcare systems are more reactive, entering the space of using their knowledge and experience to proactively help people where they seek them out or where they don't, where you can introduce them. And I think that's what Livaware is, hopefully definitely doing, is bringing specialists and expert nurses to one place. It's you come to Livaware because you need a nurse consultant who's been a nurse consultant for 30 years in orthopedics. They're there for you. But oh, you've also got a cardiac issue after that. We've also got a nurse consultant who's the one that's 30 years because they've hit their ceiling in the profession in the NHS. And unless they go into management, they just stay there. So now bringing an opportunity where people can work privately and use their skills would be a nice thing. Maybe not in such a capitalist way, but I think there's definitely scope there for nurses to better themselves, better the profession, and better kind of communities they serve.
Thanks so much for sharing. I really value all your perspectives, and something that really strikes me about you from this conversation and previous conversations we've had is how driven by your own values you are. You know, you're talking about this idea of not just starting a business for its own sake and clearly not being motivated just by money. It's really about these things that you care about. And that really comes through in the way you talk about things, and I'm sure will inspire other people and the people that currently work for you as well.
Hope so.
Yeah. So final question. I'm curious to know, so you know, day to day, you're a busy guy, you are working hard, and obviously, you know, it can be stressful with running a business and managing, because I know you do clinical work as well. Just tell the listeners, what do you do to have fun, to relax, just to manage that stress? Like, what would you do to wind down? And do you have any kind of routine that you use to do that?
I had no routine. I think that's probably the best thing about it, that if I got out of my routine, it'd probably stress you more. So I kind of keep it fluid as much as possible. Again, I think early doors, I tried to learn to manage the stress at the root cause of it. So manage the things that cause you to be stressed. Is it time pressures, or is it work deadlines, or is it something like that? And understanding what triggers you. And I then, I don't want to say stay away from them, but staying on top of them, definitely. And I think I'm in a very, I say, fortunate position as a business owner now, as I get to fire myself from as many jobs as possible. So the things that give me the stress, I can start to find people who like doing that as a job. But what I do, I also enjoy stress at times, which is a weird thing, but I do see it as a hormone that's there within us for a reason. And I think if you listen to your body, something stressing you has probably got some importance. And I think listening to yourself within that and trying to really work out, how important is it to me? How stressful is it making me? Am I just being lazy? I think that's why so many people get essays done just before deadline, because that pressure does kind of evoke something within you, and being able to be self-aware of that, articulate it, and then the next step is managing that, right? I'm going to put myself under a little bit of stress at this point, because I know that's going to probably give the best outcome for me in this way, like you do at the gym, like you do in sports. So bringing that kind of into a life area. And I think I try to practice stoicism in a way and kind of release stress where I can. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always work, but you try. This is the thing, and I think it's an ongoing development. It'll never be perfect. You know, have a stress-free life. But then, does anyone want a stress-free life completely? Sounds pretty boring to me, to be honest. And I think one thing that really changed my life was music. I think when I left work and I was building the business and getting CPC registration, I listened to like 64,000 minutes of Spotify in under a year, which is a lot of time. And understanding songs in a different way and how they're put together, and like time kind of within it, where a lot happens within a 4 or 5 minute track, it kind of really gives you, again, a different perspective. For me, it did anyway. And that's definitely something that I enjoy, is when I'm on the way to patients or having your headphones in, noise cancelling on to know that you can hear anyone else, and just vibing. I think that's such a great way to just spend dead time sometimes. So yeah, if you ever see me on the train, I'm probably that guy, like bobbing along.
I was vibing earlier in the co-working space that I work in, as bobbing
It's
my
infectious,
head.
right? This is the thing. People will be like, oh yeah, I love that. Let me put something on. I love it.
I was a little bit self-conscious of the fact that I might have been distracting other people with my movement, because everyone else is just completely still, and then
you can control yourself, not other people. There's stoicism, you see. Vibe away.
Thank you so much for sharing that. There's some really lovely takeaways from what you were talking about with stress there, and stuff that I really believe in myself. And there's actually some of the stuff that I teach other people with the work I do. But stress actually is there to help us ultimately, and it's really only when it's being activated in a kind of chronic, diffuse way that it's really problematic, and we can all learn to harness it. And it sounds like you actually consciously do that and recognize its value. So that's something.
Try to do that. That's the thing. Not always, but I think, again, accepting that it's never going to be perfect, and it's an ongoing process that you learn the next time, which is important, I think, to really ground yourself in that. But the whole thing's a journey.
Love it. Well, Hemmen, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and I just wish you the best of luck with what you're doing. It's amazing.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. And same back to you as well. Everything that you're doing in terms of the name itself and the trademark that you got on the name is great. Nurse Wellbeing Mission, so that's fantastic. I think it's really going to help a lot of people out there, and I'm excited to see that journey as well.
Cheers.